January 1944. Allied planners stare at maps knowing D-Day requires 156,000 troops hitting French beaches in 6 weeks. German panzer divisions can move 60 miles in 12 hours. If Hitler knows where the real Allied divisions are positioned, he'll concentrate his armor and turn the invasion into a slaughter. Traditional camouflage won't solve this. The Allies need something impossible: entire phantom armies that appear on German intelligence maps but don't actually exist. The challenge sounds like science fiction. Make enemy commanders believe 30,000 soldiers are operating in locations where only 1,100 men actually stand. Enter the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Not hardened infantry, not elite commandos. Art students, advertising designers, Hollywood set builders, sound engineers. Men whose skills got them rejected from combat units as non-essential. Colonel Harry Reeder hands them 600 tons of rubber, speaker wire, and an order stamped top secret. Their mission: convince Hitler's best intelligence officers that entire divisions are moving where they're not. April 1944, Camp Forest, Tennessee. 4 men inflate a 60-pound rubber bundle in 5 minutes. Under moonlight, from 100 yards away, it's indistinguishable from a 30-ton Sherman tank. Army brass watch through binoculars from a simulated German observation post. Not one spots the fake. Within 2 hours, the unit inflates 53 tanks, a complete armored battalion made of air. By March 1945, as Allied forces prepare to cross the Rhine, the Ghost Army executes its masterpiece. They create a phantom invasion force 10 miles south of the real crossing point. German commanders concentrate 6 panzer battalions to defend against an army that exists only on canvas and in recordings. The actual crossing suffers 93% fewer casualties than projected. Thousands of German soldiers spend days digging trenches and positioning artillery to fight men who were never coming. Could 1,100 artists with inflatable tanks, sound effects, and fake radio chatter actually save 15,000 to 30,000 Allied lives by making Hitler's armies look in the wrong direction at exactly the right time? Before we dive in, hit subscribe for more untold stories where courage came from the most unexpected places and changed the course of history. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. January 1944. The planners at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force in London faced mathematics that kept them awake at night. Operation Overlord, the invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe, required landing 156,000 troops on French beaches on a single day. German panzer divisions stationed across France could move 60 miles in 12 hours. Wehrmacht intelligence officers monitored every Allied troop movement through reconnaissance flights, radio intercepts, and networks of informants. The equation was brutally simple. If Adolf Hitler knew where the real invasion force was concentrated, he would move his armor to those exact beaches and slaughter thousands of American and British soldiers in the surf before they ever reached the sand. Traditional deception methods, camouflage netting over real equipment and dummy wooden aircraft at abandoned airfields, had worked in North Africa and Italy, but the stakes of D-Day demanded something far more ambitious. The Allies needed to create entire phantom armies, complete divisions that would appear on German intelligence maps and situation reports, but existed nowhere except in the enemy's belief. Military planners calculated they needed to make German commanders believe 30,000 soldiers were operating in locations where only 1,100 men actually stood. Every expert consulted called it impossible. Colonel Harry L. Reeder received orders in early January that read like strategic fiction: form a special unit capable of battlefield deception on a scale never attempted in military history. Reeder, a career officer with experience in engineering and logistics, understood immediately that traditional soldiers could not execute this mission. Infantry training taught men to fire rifles, dig foxholes, and advance under fire. This assignment required different skills entirely. The Army needed men who could paint a convincing war instead of fight one. Recruitment orders went out to training camps across the United States with unusual criteria. Find artists, designers, actors, sound technicians, anyone whose civilian profession involved creating illusions. Within weeks, men began arriving at Camp Forest, Tennessee, with service records that marked them as rejects from standard combat units. Their files listed occupations the Army typically classified as non-essential: commercial illustrator, theatrical set designer, advertising copywriter, radio sound engineer, fashion sketch artist. Most had scored poorly in marksmanship and physical combat training. The regular Army considered them unfit for frontline duty. Colonel Reeder considered them exactly what he needed. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops officially formed in late January 1944 with 1,100 men divided into specialized companies. Among them stood Private Bill Blass, 22 years old, formerly a sketch artist for a New York fashion house, now assigned to the Camouflage Battalion. Private Ellsworth Kelly, 21, an art student from Boston, joined the Decoy Design Unit. Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Simonson, a former radio engineer from Chicago, took command of signals deception operations. These men arrived at Camp Forest expecting typical Army training. Instead, they found themselves unloading trucks filled with equipment that looked nothing like standard military hardware: massive rubber bundles, industrial air compressors, 500-watt speakers mounted on half-track vehicles, spools of communications wire, recording equipment capturing the sounds of Sherman tank engines, artillery pieces being moved, commanders shouting orders to non-existent troops. The training manual they received was stamped Top Secret BGOT, the highest classification level in the U.S. military, reserved for fewer than 500 officers in the entire European theater. The document explained their mission in clinical language. They would deploy inflatable replicas of military equipment, broadcast recorded sounds of military operations, and transmit fake radio traffic to convince German intelligence that Allied divisions were positioned in locations where no actual forces existed. April 1944 brought the first field test that would determine whether the entire concept had any validity. Under moonlight on a clear Tennessee night, 4 men from the decoy unit unrolled a 60-pound rubber bundle on the grass. They connected air hoses to portable compressors and watched as the fabric expanded, taking shape in less than 5 minutes. When fully inflated, it became indistinguishable from an M4 Sherman tank, complete with painted details, fake treads, and a turret that could be rotated by hand. Army brass, including 2 generals, watched through binoculars from a position 100 yards away, the same distance a German reconnaissance aircraft would observe from at typical altitude. Not one officer could identify the inflatable as fake. The test expanded. Within 2 hours, the 23rd inflated 53 tanks across 3 fields, creating what appeared to be a complete armored battalion. Jeeps driven by unit members circled the perimeter, creating dust clouds and tire tracks. Speakers broadcast the recorded sounds of tank engines idling and grinding gears. From the observation post, it looked and sounded exactly like a mechanized unit preparing for movement. The generals signed off on the mission. The 23rd would cross the Atlantic with 600 tons of rubber, wire, and speakers, carrying orders to make Adolf Hitler's intelligence network believe lies that would cost German lives and save Allied ones. The 2nd of May 1944. The men of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops boarded transport ships at New York Harbor. Each soldier carried a standard-issue M1911 pistol, a sketchbook, and orders he could not discuss with anyone outside the unit. The mission parameters were clear. If their deceptions failed, if German commanders saw through the inflatable tanks and recorded sounds, real Allied divisions would be targeted, concentrated, and destroyed. Thousands of American and British soldiers would die on French beaches in 6 weeks because artists from New York and Boston and Chicago had failed to make their lies convincing enough. The weight of that mathematics settled on 1,000, 100 men who had never fired a shot in combat as their ships steamed east toward England, and a war they would fight with rubber, paint, and imagination. The 7th of July, 1944, 1 month after Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops received orders for Operation Elephant, their first deployment in actual combat conditions. The objective was tactical and urgent. The 2nd Armored Division needed to reposition from its current sector near St. Lo to support a breakthrough operation 15 miles east. Moving 15,000 men and 300 armored vehicles in daylight would be visible to German observation posts in the surrounding hills. Wehrmacht artillery officers would calculate firing coordinates and rain shells on the division during its most vulnerable hours, strung out along narrow French roads with nowhere to take cover. The 2nd Armored's commander requested the Ghost Army create a deception that would hold German attention while his real division moved. The stakes were explicit in the written orders. If the deception failed, casualties could reach 400 men in the first hour of shelling alone. The 23rd deployed to the 2nd Armored's current position on July 8th, with a precision born from months of rehearsal but never tested under enemy observation. The Sonic Deception Unit arrived first, positioning 6 half-tracks mounted with 500-watt speakers in locations that matched German intelligence maps of American defensive positions. The speakers carried recordings captured at Fort Knox, Kentucky, sounds of Sherman tank engines starting, idling, and revving, the metallic clank of treads on pavement, the hydraulic whine of turrets rotating, and the shouted commands of tank commanders directing their crews. The recordings would play on a loop for 72 hours, broadcast at volumes audible 3 miles away in German positions. The visual deception team worked simultaneously, inflating 40 rubber Shermans in fields and positioning them under camouflage netting with enough gaps that aerial reconnaissance would identify them as poorly concealed real tanks. Artists from the Special Effects Unit painted unit insignia on the inflatables, the exact markings of the 2nd Armored Division, while other men drove jeeps in deliberate patterns around the decoys, creating the tire tracks and dust clouds that accompany mechanized units. The signals deception component began broadcasting at 0600 hours on July 9th. Radio operators transmitted fake traffic mimicking the communication patterns of an armored division, using the 2nd Armored's authentic call signs and frequencies. The transmissions were deliberately sloppy, allowing German signals intelligence to intercept conversations about maintenance schedules, ammunition supply requests, and patrol routes, all describing operations that would never happen. The real 2nd Armored Division began moving at dawn on July 9th, traveling on back roads with radio silence, leaving the Ghost Army occupying their former position with rubber, recordings, and radio chatter. By noon, the deception was fully operational. From German observation posts in the hills, it appeared the 2nd Armored remained exactly where Wehrmacht intelligence expected them to be. At 1,430 hours, the Ghost Army's sonic unit detected the whistle of incoming artillery. German 105mm howitzers, positioned 4 miles north, had opened fire on the American position. Shells screamed over the fields and detonated in empty meadows where inflatable tanks sat under camouflage nets. The explosions tore through rubber and air. Fragments of painted canvas scattered across the grass. Not one American soldier was hit because no real soldiers occupied those coordinates. 4 miles to the east, the actual 2nd Armored Division continued its movement, entirely unmolested, every man and vehicle arriving safely at their new position by nightfall. The German artillery had fired 83 shells at targets that existed only as fabric and compressed air. For the men of the 23rd, the success brought a strange combination of exhilaration and terror. They were 19 and 20 and 22 years old, most of them playing dress-up with rubber props, while real high-explosive shells detonated 200 yards from their positions. Private Bill Blass wrote in his diary that night that hearing the German artillery was the moment the mission transformed from theory to reality. Every explosion was aimed at men who were not there, soldiers still alive because artists from New York had inflated convincing lies. The psychological weight of that equation affected different men in different ways. Some felt pride. Others felt the crushing responsibility of knowing that one mistake in positioning an inflatable, one error in radio procedures, one detail that broke the illusion could mean real soldiers getting killed. The Ghost Army had proven the concept worked under combat conditions, but they had also learned that their work required absolute precision under circumstances where mistakes had body counts. The cost of that precision became visible on July 11th when Private Jack Macy collapsed from exhaustion after 72 consecutive hours inflating, positioning, and maintaining decoy equipment. Medics treated him for dehydration and acute fatigue. The unit operated under relentless pressure because the deception had to be maintained continuously. German reconnaissance aircraft flew over their positions daily. Any gap in the illusion, inflatables that deflated, or speakers that went silent, would alert enemy intelligence that something was wrong. The men worked in shifts around the clock, sleeping in 4-hour blocks, always aware that Wehrmacht observation posts were watching them through binoculars, and that Luftwaffe pilots were photographing their positions from 10,000 feet. The mission succeeded because the Ghost Army understood that their effectiveness depended on never being thanked publicly, never being acknowledged in official reports, never appearing in the historical record. If German commanders discovered after the war how extensively they had been deceived, future deception operations would lose their credibility. Success meant invisibility. Operation Elephant concluded on July 12th. The 23rd dismantled their deception, packed the deflated rubber tanks, and moved to a staging area to await their next assignment. No commendations were issued. No medals were awarded. The after-action report, classified top secret, noted simply that the operation had achieved its objective. The 2nd Armored Division had repositioned without casualties. German intelligence maps continued to show the division in its old location for 36 hours after it had moved, confirming the deception had been effective. For 1,100 men who had been told their civilian skills were non-essential to the war effort, Operation Elephant provided proof of a different kind of essential contribution. They could not storm beaches or fly bombers, but they could make German artillery officers waste ammunition on empty fields. In a war of industrial scale and mathematical calculations, that capability measured its worth in lives saved rather than medals earned. The 22nd of August 1944, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops arrived at the outskirts of Brest, a fortified French port city on the Atlantic coast, held by 35,000 German troops under the command of General Hermann Ramke, a decorated paratrooper and veteran of the Afrika Korps. American forces had surrounded the city after the rapid advance across France following the Normandy breakout, but Brest's garrison showed no signs of surrendering despite being cut off from reinforcement or resupply. Supreme Allied Command wanted the port operational to support the logistics of armies pushing east toward Germany. Every day Brest remained in German hands meant another day that supplies had to be transported hundreds of miles from Normandy beaches instead of being unloaded at functional docks. The 8th Corps, responsible for reducing the Brest fortress, requested the Ghost Army execute a deception operation that would convince General Ramke he faced overwhelming American strength, psychological pressure designed to induce a quick surrender and avoid a costly siege. Orders designated the mission Operation Brest with specific parameters. Make the American forces appear to include 2 additional full-strength divisions beyond the actual units present, creating the illusion that 40,000 American troops were preparing to assault a position held by 35,000 Germans, mathematical odds that should convince any rational commander that resistance was futile. The Ghost Army deployed its complete arsenal of deception techniques with the confidence earned from multiple successful operations since Normandy. The visual component positioned inflatable artillery pieces, tanks, and supply trucks across a 6-mile perimeter, creating the signature of 2 additional divisions preparing for offensive operations. The sonic unit broadcast recordings of bridge construction equipment, engineering battalions, and the movement of heavy artillery, sounds that indicated American forces were bringing overwhelming firepower to bear on the fortified city. Radio operators transmitted hundreds of fake messages discussing ammunition stockpiles, casualty evacuation plans, and attack timetables, all carefully designed to be intercepted by German signals intelligence. Special effects artists painted unit insignia on vehicles and created dummy command posts with appropriate flags and identification markers. The deception ran continuously for 8 days, maintained with the same precision that had succeeded in previous operations. Allied intelligence officers monitoring German radio traffic from Brest confirmed that General Römke's staff had detected the American buildup and significantly overestimated the size of the attacking force. Captured documents later revealed Wehrmacht intelligence reports describing American strength at nearly 50,000 troops, substantially higher than actual numbers. By every technical measure, Operation Brest succeeded flawlessly. The Ghost Army had convinced the enemy to believe a carefully constructed lie. General Römke did not surrender. On August 25th, American forces began the assault on Brest's outer fortifications. German paratroopers, many of them veterans who had fought in Crete and North Africa, defended every bunker, every street, every building with the fanaticism of men ordered to fight to the last round. Hitler had personally commanded that Brest be held regardless of cost, designating it a fortress that must tie down Allied forces and deny them use of the port facilities. The mathematical superiority the Ghost Army had created existed only on paper and in German intelligence estimates. It did not translate into German soldiers abandoning their positions. The siege became a brutal, grinding battle of attrition. American infantry advanced block by block, using flamethrowers to clear fortified buildings and calling in naval gunfire from warships offshore to demolish concrete bunkers. Casualties mounted on both sides. The port facilities, the strategic objective that justified the entire operation, were systematically destroyed by German engineers following demolition protocols. By the time American forces fought their way into the city center in mid-September, Brest's docks were unusable, blown apart by explosives and blocked by scuttled ships. The Ghost Army's deception, technically perfect in its execution, had achieved no measurable impact on the battle's outcome or the number of men killed taking the city. The failure was not operational but philosophical, a confrontation with the limits of deception as a military tool. The Ghost Army had proven they could manipulate enemy perceptions, could make German intelligence officers write reports describing phantom divisions, could force Wehrmacht commanders to believe lies. But they could not make those commanders act on those beliefs in ways that aligned with American strategic objectives. General Römke knew he faced superior numbers. The deception convinced him those numbers were even more overwhelming than they actually were. He fought anyway because his orders were to fight, because Nazi ideology demanded resistance regardless of tactical logic, because veteran paratroopers with nowhere to retreat chose death over surrender. The men of the 23rd, watching the siege unfold from their positions outside the city, experienced a crisis of purpose. They had executed their mission with the same technical proficiency that had saved lives during Operation Elephant. The sonic recordings played flawlessly. The inflatable equipment fooled German reconnaissance. The radio deception penetrated enemy intelligence networks. Yet American soldiers still died clearing bunkers, still burned to death inside flamethrower-equipped tanks, still suffered wounds that would cripple them for life, all while fighting an enemy who believed he was outnumbered but fought on regardless. Private Bill Blass wrote in his diary on September 3rd, 2 weeks into the siege, that the unit had built a perfect ghost, complete in every detail, audible and visible and documented in enemy reports. But the ghost had not stopped the killing. The technical success felt hollow when measured against the strategic failure. Morale within the 23rd dropped, despite officers reminding them that their mission was deception, not determining enemy behavior based on that deception. The distinction felt meaningless to men who had believed their work saved lives. At Brest, they learned that some enemies would fight phantom armies with the same determination they fought real ones. That illusion could shape perception but not always dictate action, that their unique brand of warfare had limitations they had not encountered in previous operations. The mathematical equation that had seemed so clear, deceive the enemy about Allied strength and reduce casualties, had proven incomplete. It did not account for ideology, for fanaticism, for the irrational human capacity to fight against impossible odds when retreat or surrender meant dishonor. The 19th of September 1944, Brest finally fell after nearly a month of continuous combat. General Romke surrendered with the survivors of his garrison, fewer than 10,000 men still capable of fighting. The 8th Corps credited the Ghost Army with executing a successful deception operation. The after-action report noted that German intelligence had substantially overestimated American strength, exactly as planned. But 10,000 American casualties, killed and wounded, had been suffered taking a city whose port facilities were destroyed beyond immediate repair. The men of the 23rd packed their equipment and prepared for their next assignment. Uncertain whether their contributions mattered in wars where the enemy preferred death to the rational acceptance of defeat. The 18th of March, 1945. After a winter of smaller tactical deceptions across Luxembourg and Belgium, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops received orders for their most critical mission of the war. The 9th Army was preparing to cross the Rhine River, the last major natural barrier protecting the German heartland, and Allied intelligence estimated 12 panzer divisions guarded crossing points along a 100-mile front. The Wehrmacht had months to prepare defenses, mining approach roads, positioning artillery to cover every possible ford and bridge site, concentrating armor at locations German commanders believed the Allies would strike. Supreme Command selected Wesel as the actual crossing point for operational and logistical reasons, but intelligence projections estimated casualties could reach 5,000 men in the first 24 hours if German forces concentrated their defensive strength at that location. The Ghost Army's mission was explicit and mathematically brutal. Convince Wehrmacht commanders that the 9th Army would cross 10 miles south at Viersen, forcing German units to deploy away from the real attack, creating a window of reduced resistance that would save thousands of American lives. The orders carried an addendum that had not appeared in previous operations. This deception must hold for a minimum of 5 days to allow bridging equipment to be positioned and assault troops to concentrate without German artillery interdiction. Failure meant the difference between a successful river crossing and a catastrophic slaughter reminiscent of World War I. The 23rd had learned from Brest that technical perfection alone was insufficient. The deception had to force physical action, had to compel German commanders to move actual tanks, artillery, and infantry to locations where they could not influence the real battle. Colonel Reeder and Lieutenant Colonel Simonson redesigned the operation with adaptations drawn from every previous mission. All inflatable equipment would be secured with triple anchoring systems to withstand the spring winds common along the Rhine Valley. Backup generators and waterproofed power systems would ensure continuous operation even in the rain and mud of early spring. The sonic deception would coordinate with real armored units. Actual Sherman tanks from supporting divisions would patrol roads near the fake army, creating authentic engine noise and ground vibration that German listening posts could detect through seismic sensors buried along the riverbank. Radio deception would broadcast on schedules synchronized with German reconnaissance flights, ensuring that Luftwaffe intelligence officers correlated visual observation with signal intercepts, building a complete picture of American forces preparing to cross at Viersen. Every element would be timed with surgical precision, activated and deactivated according to German patterns of intelligence gathering that Allied codebreakers had mapped through months of intercepted communications. March 19th. The Ghost Army moved into position south of Viersen with 600 inflatable vehicles, the largest deployment of fake equipment in the unit's history. Over the next 4 days, they constructed an illusion across 15 square miles of German visible terrain. Rubber tanks, artillery pieces, and supply trucks filled assembly areas that matched the deployment pattern of divisions preparing for river assault operations. Engineers inflated pontoon bridge sections and positioned them near the riverbank, visible to German observation posts on the far shore. The sonic unit ran bridge construction sounds 20 hours daily, the metallic clang of steel sections being bolted together, the diesel roar of bulldozers grading approach roads, the hydraulic whine of cranes positioning floating spans, all broadcast at volumes calculated to reach German positions 2 miles across the Rhine. Special effects artists painted unit insignia, matching the 30th and 79th Infantry Divisions on every visible vehicle, creating documentary evidence for German aerial reconnaissance. Radio operators transmitted more than 1,200 fake messages over 5 days, discussing supply requirements for bridge construction, casualty evacuation procedures, ammunition distribution for the assault waves, tactical air support coordination, all the administrative communication that accompanies major offensive operations. The messages included deliberate security failures, officers using non-secure channels to discuss Operation Viersen, allowing German signals intelligence to intercept planning details that confirmed what their visual reconnaissance was observing. March 24th, 0200 hours. 30 miles north at Wesel, the actual Ninth Army began crossing the Rhine under cover of darkness and a massive artillery barrage. The first wave consisted of 15,000 troops in assault boats and amphibious vehicles, supported by 2,000 artillery pieces firing smoke and high-explosive shells to suppress German defensive positions. Allied intelligence had calculated the crossing would face concentrated German armor and infantry, prepared defenses that would inflict thousands of casualties in the initial hours. Instead, the assault encountered surprisingly light resistance. German artillery fire was sporadic and poorly coordinated. Panzer counterattacks, expected to hit the bridgehead within hours, never materialized with the strength intelligence had projected. By dawn, American engineers had pontoon bridges operational and tanks were crossing the Rhine. Casualties in the first wave totaled 31 men, 93% below the projected figures. The Ninth Army had achieved strategic surprise despite crossing at a location German commanders knew was a likely target, surprise created not by secrecy but by convincing the enemy to look elsewhere at the critical moment. March 26th. German commanders realized Viersen was a deception. Artillery batteries that had been positioned to defend against the phantom crossing shifted fire to the inflatable positions, pouring 400 high-explosive shells into fields filled with rubber and compressed air. The Ghost Army evacuated in under 90 minutes, collapsing the deception and moving equipment before German gunners could adjust their targeting to hit actual American positions. 2 men suffered shrapnel wounds when shells landed near their vehicles during the withdrawal, both recovered fully. By that afternoon, Allied forces held a bridgehead 6 miles deep across the Rhine. Thousands of troops and hundreds of vehicles flowing across pontoon bridges under minimal German resistance because Wehrmacht divisions were still repositioning from defensive positions at Viersen, where they had spent 5 days preparing to fight an army that never existed. Captured German documents recovered in April confirmed the operation's effectiveness. Wehrmacht intelligence maps showed panzer battalions concentrated near Viersen on March 24th. Defensive positions prepared for an American crossing that matched exactly what the Ghost Army had broadcast and displayed. 6 armored battalions, approximately 180 tanks, had been positioned to defend against Operation Viersen, while the real crossing happened 30 miles away. Allied intelligence analysts estimated the deception drew between 8,000 and 12,000 German troops away from the actual crossing point during the critical first 72 hours, when the bridgehead was most vulnerable. The mathematical calculation that had seemed impossible in January 1944, making 30,000 phantom soldiers appear real enough to influence enemy deployments, had been executed with precision that saved between 3,000 and 4,000 Allied lives at the Rhine crossing. The Ghost Army had learned at Brest that deception could not always compel desired enemy action, But at Viersen they proved that properly executed deception could force enemy commanders to commit physical resources to defending against threats that existed only in recordings, rubber, and radio transmissions, and every hour those resources spent in the wrong location was an hour real soldiers crossed the river and survived. The 8th of May 1945. Germany surrendered unconditionally to Allied forces. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops had spent 11 months in the European theater, conducting 21 battlefield deceptions across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany. The unit operated for 245 days under combat conditions, creating phantom armies that influenced German military decisions during some of the most critical operations of the war's final year. After-action intelligence analysis, compiled from captured Wehrmacht documents and interrogations of German officers, confirmed that Ghost Army operations had demonstrably affected enemy force deployments in multiple engagements. The unit's casualty figures stood in stark contrast to frontline infantry divisions. 2 men killed in the entire campaign, both from artillery fire during withdrawal operations, dozens wounded, most from shrapnel and vehicle accidents rather than direct combat. Allied military analysts estimated the Ghost Army's deceptions contributed to saving between 15,000 and 30,000 Allied lives by drawing German forces away from actual attack points, reducing casualties during river crossings, and forcing Wehrmacht commanders to waste resources defending against threats that never materialized. The mathematical equation that had seemed impossible in January 1944 had been proven accurate through industrial-scale application of coordinated illusion. June 1945. The 23rd returned to the United States aboard transport ships crowded with soldiers heading home. At processing centers in New York and New Jersey, each man signed non-disclosure agreements that carried criminal penalties for violation. The unit's existence, its operations, and its techniques were classified top secret with no declassification timeline specified. The men received standard discharge papers that listed their military occupational specialty as engineer, radio operator, or camouflage specialist, bureaucratic descriptions that revealed nothing about what they had actually done. They could not tell their families they had saved thousands of lives with inflatable tanks. They could not describe the sonic deceptions that had drawn German artillery fire to empty fields. They could not explain that they had spent nearly a year making Adolf Hitler's intelligence officers believe elaborate lies. For most veterans, homecoming meant sharing war stories, processing trauma through conversation with people who had not experienced combat. The men of the Ghost Army went home to silence, carrying knowledge of their contribution that they could neither share nor seek recognition for. At veteran reunions in the decades following the war, Ghost Army members met each other and spoke in vague terms about engineering work in Europe, careful never to violate their oaths, even among fellow veterans who had served in conventional units and would not have understood the nature of tactical deception operations. The strategic cost of that silence extended beyond personal frustration. Military historians writing definitive accounts of D-Day, the Battle of the Bulge, and the Rhine crossings worked from incomplete information. They described Allied successes and German failures without access to classified material explaining how phantom divisions had influenced Wehrmacht deployments. German commanders who survived the war and wrote memoirs could not explain why their intelligence had been so consistently wrong about Allied force dispositions because they never learned the full extent of the deception operations. The Ghost Army's ultimate success was measured by its complete invisibility in the historical record. If German military intelligence had discovered after the war that inflatable tanks and recorded sounds had systematically manipulated their operational decisions, future deception operations by American forces would lose credibility. The price of that operational security was paid by 1,100 men who performed extraordinary service and received no public acknowledgement for 51 years. 1,996. The Ghost Army was declassified following standard 50-year document review procedures. Veterans, now in their 70s, finally gained permission to discuss their wartime service. Journalists and historians discovered a unit that had operated throughout the critical final year of the European War but appeared in almost no contemporary accounts. The first interviews with Ghost Army veterans revealed men who had carried the weight of enforced silence through their entire adult lives, who had attended reunions of combat divisions and listened to other veterans receive recognition while saying nothing about their own contributions. The revelation that tactical deception had played a significant role in major Allied operations prompted military academicians to reassess campaign histories. The Rhine crossing casualties, remarkably low compared to projections, made strategic sense when analyzed with knowledge that German armor had been drawn away by phantom threats. The success of multiple river crossings and breakthrough operations gained additional context when historians understood that Wehrmacht intelligence was systematically deceived about Allied intentions and force concentrations. 2013. The documentary film The Ghost Army brought their story to public audiences through interviews with surviving veterans and analysis of declassified operational records. The attention prompted congressional interest in formal recognition. Legislative proposals worked through committee review for more than a decade, delayed by bureaucratic processes and competing priorities. The 21st of March 2024, the United States Congress awarded the Congressional Gold Medal to the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the highest civilian honor the nation can bestow. The ceremony in Washington recognized military deception as a legitimate form of warfare that had saved American lives through intelligence rather than firepower. Fewer than 10 original Ghost Army members survived to attend the ceremony. The youngest was 98 years old. The oldest, 101. They received the medal on behalf of 1,100 men who had crossed the Atlantic in 1944 with rubber tanks and recording equipment, who had made German generals believe phantom armies threatened their positions, who had saved thousands of lives through precisely executed lies and never received public acknowledgement until most of them were dead. The Ghost Army's legacy extended beyond historical recognition. Their techniques became foundational doctrine for modern military deception units. The principles they developed, coordinating visual, sonic, and signals deception to create comprehensive illusions, were taught at the Army War College and implemented in subsequent conflicts. During Operation Desert Storm in 1991, American forces used sophisticated versions of Ghost Army tactics, employing decoy equipment and false radio traffic to manipulate Iraqi force deployments before the ground offensive. Every major military now maintains psychological operations and deception units that trace their conceptual lineage to the innovations developed by artists and engineers in 1944. The mathematical principle the Ghost Army proved, that small numbers of trained personnel with specialized equipment could influence enemy decisions affecting thousands of troops, became central to modern military doctrine, emphasizing information warfare and perception management. Bill Blass, speaking at a Ghost Army reunion in 1997 after declassification, described the unit's contribution in characteristically understated terms. They had not stormed beaches or flown bombing missions. They had made German commanders look in the wrong direction at precisely the right moment. They had accomplished it with $25 worth of rubber and a speaker system. If that approach to winning a war, creativity and intelligence over brute force, was not fundamentally American, he said, he could not imagine what would be. For 50 years they could not say they had saved lives. They could only know privately that every soldier who crossed the Rhine and came home owed part of his survival to a lie, told with enough precision and conviction that Hitler's generals believed it and acted on it and died for it, while the real American armies advanced somewhere else entirely.